Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gongi-Ruzic. And everybody gets a coach this week. It was a massive coaching announcement week in Canadian soccer, but some exciting things for the podcast as well. We're welcoming in a new producer as well, Michael Nardi. So good to have Michael on the team. But Brendan, Alex, how you guys doing? It's nice to be back, and it seems like the weather's a little bit improved this week. We were just talking about that before as well.
The weather, the coaching climate, everything's getting better, Ben. We just got, the real frigidness of February approaching, but at least we got coaches, right, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. Nothing like some coaches. I mean, Ben's out here running in the snow and wondering why sickness is giving him a run for his money. So hopefully Ben will hold up with us through the month of February as he combats his running habits. It's a little easier to run in Vancouver, I can tell you that. But
yeah, Ben, you know what comes after the 25th mile? Pneumonia.
Yeah, the 10K that I did last night felt like a marathon. And there's this meme from, I think it must have been 15 years ago. There was a local news reporter that was talking to a runner, and the runner was saying that the snow is the perfect texture for running, and it's dry snow, so your feet don't get wet, and then runs off into the distance, and she falls and hits her head or whatever. And so I was running in the snow last night, and I was thinking of that meme the entire time, that I'm just like one wrong step away from being a meme. At least I wasn't on local news though. But Alex has been running as well.
Funny you bring that up because I got a great one as well. I've never seen this before, and we're all broadcast geeks, right? We love some vintage broadcasting and old clips. And it was the 1969 NFC Championship game in Minnesota, and they're showing the field conditions before they get going, and it's typical hoopla. Like, we're here in Minnesota, and this is what the field looks like, and it's nearly perfect conditions. And as they show the grounds crew, and there's a man pushing like what looks like a World War I cannon that's a flamethrower, and he's heating up the ground. And then the tag of this before he throws up to the commentators is, so they've got the flamethrowers working, and they believe that it will stay thawed and won't freeze over again until at least halftime. Up to you. Like this can't be real. This is how we used to live. This is how we played competitive real games back in the day. So I'm glad to see that we've evolved from that as a footballing nation.
Not so far. At the University of Montreal, at the 2019 U Sports Men's Soccer Championships, I was covering it. It was one of the first tournaments that I ever covered, and I was asked to shovel the field as maybe one of the only accredited media that was there through the entire weekend. There was 3 or 4 inches of snow on the field that had fallen overnight. It was like -10, and I shoveled the field so they could play the National University Soccer Championship. So hopefully we don't see that kind of situation in MLS, which we do sometimes, or NSL, and we haven't seen it in the CPL yet. But
in fairness to the Carabin, management crew, like when I see you walk into the press box, I think, hard labor right there. Get that man a shovel. Hard labor. Ben Steiner
shoveled the field is doing a lot of work there.
You've
probably
been shoveling a lot of
the
shit
corner
in
flag.
Canadian media for a long time, buddy. So take a real snow shovel. It'll be a breather for you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up with a lot of snow in Vancouver, of course, but there was a decent bit of shoveling that I got done on that field. I did the whole 18-yard box, so that's at least a decent amount of space on that field. But we'll start off with the Canadian women's national team. We said a little while ago that Casey Stoney would be the dream hire for this team. They get that one over the line. I was shocked when I saw some of the reports come out because I just couldn't believe it, that was actually something that was happening. It's another Kevin Blue special. There's donations and philanthropic efforts that will help Casey Stoney's wages get paid and her be able to settle into that role. She's going to stay in San Diego for the time being while she takes on this role, but I think just an outstanding hire. And even if it's not Canadian, which I know some people had some judgments of, it is great to see Casey Stoney finally get into the Canadian women's national team, because I honestly thought it might have been too good to be true.
Yeah, I mean, hey, all you guys on the Northern Football Podcast, you got to listen. You got to hear a lot of rambling about Ben's running habits and Brendan's parenting life and, whatever I've got going out here, West Coast life, bro. But we also sometimes have some good predictions and get some things right. And definitely one thing we've been on since the start was Canada should have a swing at Casey Stoney. But at the same time, it's easy to say that, right? It's like saying, the Canadian men's national team, they should have gone after, Pep Guardiola or Carlo Ancelotti, right? You can throw those sorts of names out, but it's one thing to actually go make it happen. And Kevin Blue went out and made it happen. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised. He's been a guy who makes swings. We got a hint of that in the men's national team search where he got a Jesse Marsh. There were names linked to some pretty impressive coaching trees. And now you see what this women's national team coach. First, I was just really impressive to hear the process. He spoke about it. He kind of almost threw it away. He's like, yeah, we interviewed almost 40 candidates. And you're like, excuse me? Like he went through a rigorous and intense process. They didn't just land at Casey Stoney because she was the first and only choice. They went through a process, and ultimately she emerged as the best choice. Most importantly, she was willing to come here. Like, this is a coup on so many fronts. I mean, her experience, her CV speaks for itself. She's familiar with the players. Her style of play actually as well blends with the team. Like, there's just so much to like with this hire, isn't it, Brendan?
Man, my first reaction was, I'm so glad that Kevin Blue is a man of his word, and he listened to the August 6th episode of Northern Football when one Alexandre Gonge-Ruzic said, you know who my candidate would be? As Ben and I waxed on about the obvious ones, and we spent quite a few minutes on Carmelina Moscato, and then you hit us over the head with Casey Stoney is a type of coach that I'm looking at, and someone that I think would be a Jesse Marsh level swing for Kevin Blue to take. I hadn't heard anyone suggest that. Ben and I both reacted the same way, like, oh, that would be a great hire. And as I thought about it, I thought she really would be, an outstanding candidate. Then months went by. Of course, at this time, Bev Priestman was still in the job. As November's approaching, I start asking people in and around the Canada soccer scene, some alumni, what they've heard, because I hadn't really heard any names. And I had hoped that Stoney's name might actually come up. End of November comes, and I've hit all of the regulars in the know. Anything on Stoney? You guys heard anything? Nothing. Now, maybe I've fallen out of favor with all of these people and everyone just lied to me, or it really was, under the radar until Kevin Blue had mentioned, was it he referenced a game in December. Where was he going in December?
Sinclair's last game. So
right.
then he went down a little double dip, Portland to San Diego.
Right. Okay. So maybe I got my timeline wrong. Maybe this was me asking in October. And then in November, he does that trip, and there we go. And now Casey Stoney is the head coach of the Canadian women's national team, which I agree with you both. I think is a fantastic hire. And I really appreciated the brevity and the directness in which she spoke, which stereotypically you can say is very English. But as we know from two Northeastern English coaches that have been in national team coaching positions, that doesn't apply to every English person. So the way that Casey Stoney presented herself, at least to the media, from how Kaylin Sheridan talked about her in her time with San Diego, I think she's going to win that room over very, very quickly.
Yeah, when you look at her familiarity with a lot of the players, including Kaylin Sheridan, who really came into her own under Casey Stoney with San Diego, but you also look at, what Casey Stoney's been able to achieve, not only as a player, she knows the international game, and it felt like it was just a matter of time until she took on an international role and the opportunity to leave San Diego, even though it wasn't necessarily by her own doing, and the situation there, maybe a bit of a silver lining in disguise. Because she is able to step away, get into the international game with the top 10 country in the world, one that has an exciting player pool, but just hasn't necessarily had that direction since winning the gold medal. And you can even argue that they didn't really have much of a direction when they won the gold medal either, because that was still, are we moving on from Christine Sinclair or not during that tournament? But she comes into international management with experience with England. She has built things in the past with the Manchester United women's team. She's seen what a successful women's club can look like in terms of a standard bearer in the San Diego Wave. And now she comes to Canada, where she said in her first press conference that she sees, this is an organization with integrity now. And that's not something that we've heard a lot of from Canada Soccer over the last year, especially. But then, we're hearing all of these reports over the last little while. But the question from W Soccer CA is, what are your takeaways from that first press conference? Of course, you addressed the media yesterday, and it was pretty big picture. There wasn't a whole ton of footballing, Brendan.
There wasn't a lot. Yeah, I'm surprised no one seemed to be bothered to ask her what it was like to inherit a team of some very promising but inexperienced rising stars and some inexperienced veterans. That seems to be, to me, the best way to describe what this lot is now in this next phase. But there'll be plenty of time to get into that. New coaches often say, oh, there was 3 factors or 3 reasons, and they pick a list of things to isolate. I don't think anyone would have expected the culture here ticking all of my boxes to be the one that Casey Stoney would say, particularly with, what had come out about what the culture was like behind the scenes of this Canadian women's team and the program. But someone who admitted she did her due diligence. When she's referencing the culture, I believe that she's mainly talking about what Kevin Blue and what those that have been in prominent positions and been able to put their hands on things since at least March of last year and through May, of course, in the hiring of Jesse Marsh, that this is a new age. And, when I talk to people in other sports and in the media and they ask, well, how come things are so different at Canada Soccer? I often say that it is night and day, and you can pinpoint Kevin Blue's arrival to when that switched and when that change, really took over. And it seems like, it has in all facets of the organization now. And she sees that, Casey Stoney sees that, and sees this as a group that she really wants to be a part of and take to the next level. And I think that they're in that same situation as Marsh, where, they got to a pretty good point and reached heights that once seemed unimaginable for the program. But this is a new cycle now. And Casey Stoney, I think, will be able to find more in it and take them to what that next new height is.
And she said yesterday as well that the more time that she spent with Kevin Blue, the more she was convinced of the role. And Jesse Marsh said basically the same sentence when he was hired as well. I would like to spend some time with Kevin Blue and just have him convince me of stuff I don't believe in and see how much I believe in it after a few days. Because in terms of, somebody that can convince you of something, he seems pretty good at that. And he's landed two big names in Casey Stoney and Jesse Marsh, Alex.
Yeah, I don't know how much budget you got in your personal finances, but I know you were rumblings of a triathlon. You might want to hit up Kevin Blue to help you in that quest.
He'll fundraise for you. He'll find ways to get money that you didn't know existed.
Yeah, and he'll
fundraise and motivate. You get a 2-for-1 special.
What's the old cliche? Like, oh, you got to find that person that can squeeze $20 out of a stone. Yeah, how about 200 million? Because that's what it seems like Kevin Blue is able to do. How big is that stone?
Yeah, I'd say clearly. I'd like to know what stone it is. You know how rent. Well, I'd say you got that Stoney too. And hey, rent prices in Vancouver, we know what they are. But no, with Blue, I mean, I think it's funny because we're almost used to it now. It's funny to think it's been less than a year on the job, and we've just been used to the Kevin Blue effect, where we're sitting there and Stoney's going, "Oh yeah, like Kevin Blue," and you're like, "Okay, yeah." But at the same time, it is important to highlight that because I mean, there were some people on the call that maybe weren't as familiar with Canada Soccer. At least the last year of what's happened, because there were some questions pretty pointedly to Stoney, like, why would you come to Canada Soccer? Like, haven't you seen what's going on? And she's like, look, all I've dealt with is Kevin Blue, and he's been top class. So I think this was also probably a big moment for Blue, just in terms of, once again, being out there, being in the general consciousness, because yes, the you and I and those who follow Canadian soccer pretty regularly have gotten accustomed to the good vibes he's brought over the last year. But I think now the general consciousness is going to start to see the work he's doing, and ahead of 2026, it's going to be remarkable to see what he's able to do. But yeah, otherwise, in terms of takeaways from this press conference, adding to your point of the culture, Brendan, I think it's worth noting the locker room culture was probably a big factor Stoney mentioned. Of course, she referenced several times she had a great relationship with Kaylin Sheridan from their time at San Diego. Sheridan was a key leader as well. She'd sometimes step up, wear the armband if some of the other more veteran players weren't around. I think that's something where a lot of conversations with Sheridan would have revealed the strong locker room culture. We hear it a lot from anyone who talks about this women's team. Like, look, one of our big strengths sometimes isn't always like tactics or skills. It's just a lot of them like each other, and they show that with their chemistry, etc. So I think that's another aspect for Stoney. The last thing that stood out, I mean, the one soccer question we were able to edge in, I asked her about just style of play and where she kind of saw the fit. She said right away she wants to be direct, vertical. And I thought that was interesting because sometimes the challenge for this Canadian women's national team, it's always, oh, how are they going to score? How are they going to score? And it's usually, oh, they need to hold more possession. They need to be this or that. But then under Kenneth Heiner-Moller, they tried to hold a lot more possession, and it didn't really work because that wasn't their style, right? They're not a team that's a possession-based team, but they have good attackers. They have good transitional pieces. And I thought that really lit some light bulbs of, oh, okay, I think that's going to be fascinating to see the pace of their front line, trying to get in behind defenders. Jessie Fleming and Julia Grosso, Simi Awujo in the middle, just jobs there to win the ball, transition it, not to hold the ball too much, for their defenders to still defend. I like she mentioned that. She's like, look, I got to top class backline. We're still going to want to keep clean sheets. I thought there were a lot of green flags in terms of the way she wants to play and how that fits the team. And sometimes that hasn't always been the case with past attempts to so-called modernize the football Canada plays.
And for Matt Paternostra, what is Stoney's preferred formation, and how could we see this play out in the Canadian women's national team? You mentioned that she wants to play a little bit more of a direct game, and you look at some of the attacking players that Canada has, and you think, okay, a direct game could probably suit them. A player like Evelyn Vienne, a direct game is probably going to suit her more than a possession game. Olivia Smith, that's a player that can play, all around, but that's somebody who direct could probably help out a little bit more. And then you look at those midfield players. I mean, I didn't even mention Jordan Heidema, who can play in a more direct game as well. But you look at the midfield, and those are players that can quickly transition the ball. Your mind goes to a Jessie Fleming that can quickly transition from the defense, which is going to stay, I think, pretty similar because it's worked and they've got a good core there. They've got, Kadisha Buchanan and Vanessa Gilles really building that out of the back line, and you're not going to mess with that. But then that transition game is going to be a lot faster, and I think that's something that could pay off with Canada's attackers, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we mentioned the direct play. It's very Jesse Marsh Red Bull-esque, funnily enough. I don't know if there's coincidences. I imagine we'll see some échange des idées between the two, as they say. So something to keep an eye on. But in terms of formation at San Diego, Stoney had one big preference. It was the 4-2-3-1. I think immediately if you put that to this Canadian team, that back four, I mean, there's options. I'm curious to see what she does. Center back, Jade Rose, Vanessa Gilles, Kadisha Buchanan. Does Jade Rose push out to right back as she has recently? I think that's going to be the case when everyone's healthy. Of course, Buchanan isn't healthy at the moment, so maybe some Rose and Gilles will be the way to go. This good news for Gabby Carl at left back. I think her transitional abilities could really fit in that sort of role. Of course, can't forget Sydney Collins when she's fit. She can play a bit of a direct, two-way game, so to speak, to use hockey terms. In terms of that midfield double pivot, Simi Awujo really slots in nicely, and I think we're going to see her take a big step forward. Question is, who's going to pair alongside an Awujo in the sense that, is it going to be Fleming playing a bit deeper, or is it Grosso? And why I say that is because if it's a 4-2-3-1, that feels earmarked for a Grosso or Fleming in one of those 2-10 roles, with the other one playing a little deeper. And potentially maybe there's some other options we're not even thinking of for that 10 role, like an Olivia Smith. She's kind of played a similar position with Liverpool. And then I think the good news is the front three, the wingers, you just see, Janine Becky, Nichelle Prince, Deanne Rose, Evelyn Vienne, Jordan Hoydema, Chloe Lacasse, Mary Yasmin Aladou is another option for that 10. There are so many good fits across that front line. So I'd expect that 4-2-3-1, and I'd expect some sort of combo with that.
It was funny listening to you because the longer you went on, the more I was ready to be like, oh, thanks for the take, Bev Priestman, because you went on for 7 minutes and you just completely forgot about Mimi Aladou, who I thought would have been a little higher on your list. But look, I get it. Then that goes to show the depth that this team has, right? The player pool that Stoney talked about, and one of the reasons why it's so exciting. I think it's great that she has this year to experiment, to get to know these players. But the standout thing for me when I'm actually thinking about what does this team look like in 26 and potentially lead up to 27, I mean, it's going to be a very different team come 27. Even just towards the end of this year, there's two key players in this team that we've been talking about that might not come back at 100%. And that could open the door for either new young players or a completely, maybe even different rotation, because I don't know if Chloe Lacasse and Kadisha Buchanan will be able to come back and have the impact for Casey Stoney that they did for Bev Priestman. And that would, those are, two important pieces on the pitch and two important pieces of the field that I think will change kind of the outlook of how things go for Stoney in comparison to how things were for Priestman.
And also for Matt Paternostra, now that we have head coaches for both the men's and women's program, could you see changes to the coaching roles for the U23, U20, and U17 programs? It's never been stable or consistent at those levels. We've seen, some of the likes of those coaches step up to the women's national team role over the last little while to fill in gaps as they've continued to play games without a head coach. But Brendan, do you see more consistency coming to some of the youth coaching ranks for the Canadian soccer scene?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before, and I think it's something that Kevin Blue and Jesse Marsh recognize as important. It's still a little cart before the horse. And now that they have Stoney in place, someone who wants to implement their own system and has Alex highlighted, in a lot of ways that her way of thinking is a little Red Bull-esque. I think that will help with some synergy and, tying things together kind of at all levels. But as far as things go right now, particularly with, the women's program recovering in a lot of ways, both from how the senior players are dealt with and the culture within the camp, as that changes over with new personnel and a new coach now. To me, these are farther down the line.
Yeah, although I think now that Stoney's in place and the link we mentioned about her and Jesse Marsh and their style of play, that definitely does feel like a game changer in terms of possibilities, in terms of, now you have a very clear ideal. You can see what coaches fit in that. You have to think there's going to be some sort of plan to put in coaches in those youth camps that or youth teams that can offer that sort of role. I think it's been telling that Jesse Marsh has been spending a lot of his time as men's national team head coach, going around to different provinces, exchanging ideas, working with ways how coaches can operate. I imagine Stoney will do the same given what she brings to the table. And now I imagine there'll be an onus on bringing in more coaches with that vision and hopefully developing Canadian coaches in that vision. And I think what's nice is potentially there could be, like I mentioned, the idea exchange before between Stoney and Marsh, that could extend to the youth levels. What if you have, a U23 option at the men's U23? See, there's an Olympic cycle or something like that. Well, that coach could also step into the women's program because it's the same ideas. There's not a difference of one team's trying to play with possession, one team's trying to play more direct. I think the fact that both are playing the same can almost help the youth coaching pool because maybe you're bringing in a few names to just overall help the whole pool. So I think the youth coach is going to be maybe something like Brendan says, not the immediate future, but over the next 5 years, that has to be a huge priority for Kevin Blue to ensure these next generations of men's and women's national teams are set up to compete in the future.
Yeah, I think when you look at sort of the situation that Canada finds itself in with the youth coaching ranks as well, like you're not necessarily having those as full-time roles. A lot of these coaches are coaching in other positions as well. And so if you want to have more consistency, you're potentially looking at adding these roles full-time, and then you start talking about money again. And I don't think the enthusiasm is necessarily there from private donors and other funding to potentially fund these youth roles because it's not as, for lack of a better word, sexy to sponsor roles on youth programs as it is to the senior program. So I think it would be tougher to get consistency in that realm. But as Brendan, you said, it's a bit the cart before the horse when you're talking about those lower levels, because they really do have to get things consistently going well and stable for a little while at the top level as well.
To your point, though, it wasn't that sexy or appealing to get people to donate to the senior teams either. Both the men's or even the women's team when they were winning Olympic medals. It's something that Canada Soccer struggled with. It's why the CSB deal was created in the first place. It's something that John Herdman had to go around on his own, and he was, without a system and a structure and a tax booklet that Kevin Blue's been able to build, was able to fundraise privately and get money to, get some things done and get the men's team to a level and at a level that they'd never been before. So I think that's gonna get better. And I want to believe that in this country, there's still gonna be holes. We'll always fail in comparison to the United States if that's the bar we're always looking to compare to. But I do believe that it will be more balanced across the board, the investment and attention. And with the success that the Canadian Premier League has had so far in producing players, in building fan bases across the country, that I think the NSL will also have out the gate and deeper. I do think it's going to be a little easier to attract some investment from private donors and corporate Canada into building the national team program, not just supporting the senior national teams.
And Brendan, do you find it odd that we don't know the funders and donations towards Casey Stoney as well? Because it was very clear when Jesse Marsh came out that it was the MLS clubs, and even we got name drops of some of the donors from the MLS clubs that were contributing to the Jesse Marsh fund, where we don't have that for Casey Stoney in this new fund for women in coaching.
Yeah, I think it's a sign of how difficult it is in a country like this to fund a sport that isn't hockey. The fact that you have to do it privately, it wouldn't have been that wild. You think about the era 10 years ago, where you would be talking about putting up a GoFundMe page so that they could pay the head coach. Not a marquee head coach, not a former Premier League head coach, not a former England captain. No, a head coach, right? That's kind of where we were before. Look, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but the reality is there's always politics. It's an election year. There's a lot of people, rich people, that spend their money in certain ways that, benefit them, and they don't necessarily need the public knowing that. And I think the same kind of goes for Canada Soccer and who they deal with and stuff. So I'm not saying there's anything nefarious or shady that we should be worried about or anything. But anonymity when it comes to writing big checks is not a new thing. What's new is that they're writing these checks for Canada Soccer.
And there was also news on the Canadian men's national team front as well, or maybe a lack of news that made some waves this week. Jesse Marsh was at MLS Media and Marketing Day and said that Canada wanted to host a Camp Poutine in a January camp, but couldn't because of financial restraints. And that is still a challenge, even as we have all these big victories for Canada when it comes to getting head coaches, getting more camps, getting more opportunities. It is still a struggle, and they couldn't put together a January camp. We talked about it a little bit last time as well, how not having a January camp might not actually impact this Canadian men's national team when it comes to the Gold Cup and the other tournaments that are coming up this summer in the Nations League in a couple months as well. But it is still something that they wanted and they weren't able to do. And so the Federation is still, counting their coins, for lack of a better term, trying to just piece things together and prioritize things rather than being able to spend the money that they want to grow every aspect of the game, even at that senior level, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reminder of, where things are at financially, that while a Marsh has come in, while a Stoney has come in, there's been success, the money they receive from Copa America. There's still lots of work to be done ahead of 2026. I think it's worth noting that for as much as us, as the sickos, as the people who want these camps, there's a lot of logistical hurdles to overcome. I mentioned last week the fact that 2 of your 3 MLS clubs are currently about to be in Marbella, right? That's not going to be easy because a lot of the players you would like to draw are about to be in Spain. A bunch of the CPL teams people have mentioned it would be nice to call up some CPL players to Camp Poutine. Other than Forge and Calvary, 6 of the CPL teams aren't going to start preseason for at least another month. So a lot of these players won't even be really around for that. Then there's just the matter of opponents. It was interesting to hear. I'd mentioned it on the show a couple episodes ago. I think that Canada was looking at Vancouver for a Camp Poutine, which is super exciting, right? You got to have a home Camp Poutine for once. But then the flip side of that is opponents, if you bring them in, aren't cheap, especially, okay, you could have played the Whitecaps. They're not here. Or a TFC, those could have been the easier option. Well, then if you're going to bring in any of those Central American teams that the U.S. got for their Camp Poutine, we'll use them as a comparison. They have appearance fees, right? And it's friendlies. So usually you got to split some sort of gate revenue. It was likely that, Canada wouldn't, open up the gate revenue because there's just all sorts of things that come into play. And I think it's something where for the trade-off that you'd get for the Camp Poutine, which is looking at a bunch of MLS guys you mostly already know, I wonder if it's not going to be worth it. I understand the frustration. It's something where, again, we want to see these camps. And for Canada to be at the top level, you need these camps. There's a reason why the U.S. is doing it. There's a reason why federations do it. But if this is the difference between Canada hosting an extra U20 men's camp this year or a U18 women's camp this year, I'm okay with that trade-off. And I guess we'll just have to see. And I think the good news is with Kevin Blue in place, there's more confidence of that happening versus had this happened 3 years ago, you're like, oh, shoot, like this camp's not happening, bad, where I still have an optimism that this will maybe mean something better down the road.
100%, man. Nothing to add to that. Just well said.
And it's not necessarily a world standard either to have camps outside of international windows. Like teams do it, but it's not necessarily something that is so common. It's something the U.S. does, and we compare ourselves to the U.S. a lot of the time, but it's not something that you're seeing, every European nation do, every African nation do, every South American nation do. You're not seeing that in the same way that the U.S. has had that in the past, Brendan.
No, absolutely, man. It's a money thing. The only programs that consistently do it are the teams that can write checks and not really have to worry about things. So Saudi Arabia, Qatar does it, right? And they're off windows. A couple of the Asian countries have done it as well, East Asian. But it's just the way the calendar falls, and it's the unique scenario that we live in our great big country. where logistically it's hard to pull off. And if you're not in the US situation where things systematically come together a little bit quicker and a little bit easier, then it can be a challenge. But I'm with Alex on this point that they're really not hurting themselves by not doing it now. And I think in the future, this will be a regular thing, and we won't be talking about it in a few years.
And before we jump fully into MLS, of course, the big coaching hirings this week, but Jesse Marsh needs some new pants, I think, because every photo that we see of him are in these tight gray jeans. And I'm wearing tight gray jeans right now, but every single photo, every single game, he's wearing the same pants. So I think, Brendan, you've got some style from your years on TV, and Alex, you definitely dress better than I do. So I think you guys have to consult him on potentially some new pants, because I don't know how those aren't worn out yet.
Look, his residence is Tuscany. Okay, he's going to be just simple and fitted clothing. Like I don't know what you want him. You want to come out here in like more trackies? Does he need to look like Mauro Biello used to? I don't think I've ever seen Mauro Biello in jeans. So like, do you need him in trackies? What do you want?
I think he just needs a big gold chain, and then with the tracksuit, I think that's going to really fit the Jersey vibe. I mean, he's not much of a Jersey guy. I know he's from the middle of the U.S., but I just think Jesse Marsh. I think of his stint as the New York Red Bulls head coach. But look, you know what, Ben? He's won a lot since he's been wearing those gray pants, and athletes, they're creatures of habit. Maybe Jesse Marsh just has lucky pants, and we'll let it ride out while the luck's good. Because you also don't want to mess with what's working either.
Yeah. In his 50s, he's just become more comfortable, right? Just pants that he enjoys, durable, reliable. They look good with any type of footwear, sneakers over dress shoes. I used to be like the 20-year-old guy that was wearing dress shoes to work and, always had a collared shirt on and suits all the time. Now look at me.
Especially if his wife got him those pants too. It's going to be bold for him to maybe stop wearing them. Says, hey, if she says he looks good in it, why would he stop, right?
They definitely fit with the Canada soccer shirt, but it's something, a little thing I've noticed every time I've seen Jesse Marsh is those same pants. But Toronto FC, big week. The Whitecaps, of course, a big week as well. Toronto FC hiring Robin Fraser as their head coach. He comes back to the club. He was not Herdman. Greg Vanney's right-hand man during all those years with the club. He comes back after a spell with the Colorado Rapids that went fairly well. Colorado looked like a strong team during his time, but he comes back to TFC. He knows the club. How important is it that he knows the club in coming back to this team? Or is that an overrated characteristic?
No, I think it's a pretty good characteristic, because I think for someone who's deciding to do that, he's coming back having had an experience in the game and learned more than when he left, obviously, right? I think he's done so knowing what he's working with, but he's looked at both himself and the organization and can see a bit more accurately and maybe a bit more realistically what he can actually bring. Everyone's got an ego, right? In the sport, in the media, and thinks, oh, I can do it differently if I just get the opportunity. But I think here's someone who really, truly has the experience and the perspective to realistically look at it and say, no, this is what I would like to do. This is what I can actually do. This is how I think I can do it. And so that's why I think Robin Fraser was the best candidate in comparison to some of the others we heard about, like Gio Savarese, who may have been able to, understand the same things. The budget would be bigger. I think for a lot of coaches, that's the most appealing thing. But a bigger budget doesn't always make things easier. Where I think Robin Fraser has a unique experience from Colorado, and then his experience here with Greg Vanney and in Toronto to really know how things kind of operate. And while the budget is much bigger than when he'd left in 2019, that hasn't made things necessarily easier. It's a complicated situation, but he does seem to be someone that really has a handle of how things go. And I think that he'll have, honestly, a bit more of an effect than some of the coaches in between that maybe weren't as well versed with how things run in Toronto and how things particularly run with MLSE.
Yeah, I mean, I like this hire for TFC. To be honest, Robin Fraser had been one of my top candidates for the job since we talked about it. I mentioned him just given the links to Toronto. So I think it's good they've looked at him because, look, it might not be as sexy of a hire. I think that was definitely a sentiment you could see just out there based on some of the reaction of, okay, like there was kind of a meh. But I think for TFC, the sort of stability experience he brings is exactly what they need, because there's been so much talk of returning to the glory days, but then you look at some of the managers that have come in, they haven't been able to do that for various reasons. I think just having a voice of stability. I mean, this is Fraser's third MLS head coaching job. Can't forget that he has that Chivas USA experience on the CV, along with his Rapid stint, and then of course his lengthy spell as an assistant for TFC. Just knowing the league as well as he does, being familiar with the environment, being familiar with the group. I think that's exactly what TFC needs, or it's something where if you're going to start a rebuild, you got to start with habits. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've said it many times. If I'm looking at TFC, the big rebuild is going to come with personnel moves. It doesn't matter who the head coach is, because until you figure out the Italian situation, until you figure out how to get, some better DPs in to maximize your roster, they could have, the Pep Guardiola as a coach, and there'd still be, difficulties that they'd have to overcome. So I think the fact that Fraser's coming has proven he can be a builder, like what he did at Colorado. Like, yes, he flamed out when he did get fired, and at the same time, you can't blame him. They didn't really invest in their squad, and despite that, he got them to top of the conference a year before. And it had not been for that insane MLS format where it's like, oh yeah, you win the conference, you get 3.5 weeks off, and then you play the team fresh off the wild card. And they lost to Portland that year, Gio Savarese's Portland. He proved his success with what he can do on a shoestring budget. So I think if they can be patient and support him, this will finally give them a bit of stability at the head coach position in someone who already knows the environment and knows the team, which is a rarity among candidates.
Patient and supportive is not descriptive adjectives that we've used for this organization before, but I do think it's a new era and a new chapter with Pelly in charge now.
Yeah, I think when you look at Robin Fraser, the importance of knowing MLS is, I think, what puts him over the top of some of those other candidates that we were talking about. And, how much of a look did a guy like Tommy Wheeldon Jr. or Bobby Smirniotis get? But those guys, wouldn't have had experience in MLS, even if they maybe knew the club in some ways, especially in Bobby Smirniotis' case. But when you look at, the other coaches that we were throwing about, even if Robin Fraser had no experience with TFC, I still think he'd be the right hire just because of the experience he has on a team that doesn't swing money around in MLS, in the Colorado Rapids. He's found success there. He knows how this league works. Yes, it's changing with now that you can buy and sell players within the league, but there's still a lot of quirks that MLS has, even just the travel, that he offers that stability. Things will get sorted out after the Italians leave, especially Insigne. But he offers a stable platform that he can build. He can build the kind of DNA of this club. And then once that player personnel issue is solved, then he can start building what he sees as sort of his vision for where this club can be. And importantly, he knows what that looks like as well. He knows what this club looks like at its peak when fans are packed around BMO Field and this club is winning games. And that hasn't really happened since he left. And so for him to come back in the main job, I think is critical for this team. And it will offer, as you said, Alex, patience and stability to TFC, which is not something that we've had for a long time.
Well, I'll just add in about the Wheeldon Jr. and Smirniotis points and Fraser. While I said TFC's in a rebuild phase, and they are, I think they'd be foolish to ignore that. You also know they're in a phase where they see 2026 and there's like, why not compete? And that put them in a unique position where they're rebuilding, but they also want to be ready to peak quick. And that's what you're going to see. It's more of a retool. I think with the Smirniotis and Wheeldon Jr., this is almost better for them in a sense, because look, they should absolutely have been in full consideration for this job, and depending on what the future of TFC was going to go through, it would have made a lot of sense. But I think the reality is, I don't think the project TFC is building fits up with the timelines of what you'd want out of a Smirniotis and Wheeldon Jr. And I think with the Fraser, he offers them a good mix of, he can help you through that retool phase, he can help you, bring some stability, but then when it's time to compete, boom, he's also got that experience. And I think for Smirniotis and Wheeldon Jr., it's unfortunate because you look at the Whitecaps job coming up, and we'll touch on that, and TFC job coming up, you immediately think they should get a look, and they absolutely deserve the look. But the reality is, if you look at the semantics of both situations, there wasn't necessarily a fit for both. And I think that's why we've seen both clubs go in different directions than to hire either of the pair.
100%. I said it last week that, for Bobby specifically in Toronto, he needs a bridge guy in order to be successful, and this wasn't the right time for him. So I do think that, if he's still around in a couple of years, if things don't go well with Robin Fraser over the next 18 months, like I do think Bobby has a better chance. But something else I thought about this week, because both of those guys really should be in the conversation for MLS jobs, but it shouldn't only be these 3 Canadian jobs. And, for now, there's 3 Canadian MLS teams. That might not be the case come 26 or certainly beyond. It's going to take someone like a club situation, like a Pat Onstad, who's running things in Houston, to give one of those Canadians the chance. And I think about Tim Bezbatchenko and Wilfred Nancy. I don't know how many other American MLS clubs at the time would have given Nancy that job, But Bezbatchenko, okay, not Canadian, but with his experience and with his, I think, knowledge and awareness of the academy system, particularly in Canada, I think that went a long way in the kind of them selecting Nancy as the guy. So, when I see a Canadian like Pat Onstad get promoted into a new position, I think he's now the president of soccer for the Houston Dynamo. I think that might be the ticket, not Houston exclusively, but that you're going to have a boardroom or a decisive table with some Canadians at the table before one of those guys gets a job. And it shouldn't be exclusively one of the 3 Canadian teams.
So, Brendan, what I'm hearing is when Ben Olsen loses to another USL team in the Open Cup, you're going to open up the Smirnotis to Houston links?
I was thinking Tommy to Houston, but you're right. In the orange theme, it should be Bobby to Houston. Yeah.
Let Tommy go to FC Dallas?
One of them might be at the Vegas Whitecaps. I'm just saying. I don't know. We'll see in a couple of years.
Brendan, you read my mind. Literally, I was picking up laundry detergent this morning. Not the most exciting outing, but the last Google search on my phone, Pat Onstad, just to confirm that he was still at Houston as I was thinking. So you completely read my mind.
CanadianSoccerDaily.com more often because that was the lead 2 a.m. item on that day that it was announced.
But it's certainly interesting that we haven't seen more opportunities for those 2 coaches in particular. There are other Canadian coaches that we have seen, get opportunities in MLS. But I also was thinking, could USL be a move that they could make and kind of that skip towards MLS? I don't love it, but we've seen it work with some players that they go down for USL. It is more money in the USL, and if you can impress there, then you can get up to MLS. And that's something that Danny Dicchio is doing with Detroit City.
You know what? I think it's a good shout, but I'll just say this, that I think it depends on the age and experience of the person. For example, if York didn't hire Mauro Stacchio, if the Pascal brothers brought someone from Mexico and someone got in Mauro's ear and said, hey, there's this assistant job in Sacramento or Charlotte or whatever. It was Charleston Battery. Great name. That's the type of person and profile that I would encourage or expect to do that and take that path and believe that they could genuinely get back to MLS. And because they're doing that in the States, I immediately I think are opening themselves up to, a look at 30 jobs and not just 3, as we talked about with those 2 guys. But older guys like that, the systems that they've put in place, also the comforts that they have, they're not looking to do the USL jump, I don't think.
Well, and they're builders, right? They want to stay and build something in Canada before they leave to a USL. If they're going to leave, it's to, like an MLS where maybe you're getting a pay raise and, you've got more tools to work with or something like that. I think, too, what you can't discount, and this is different for players, I think, but for coaches, the benefit of having Champions Cup and pretty easy access compared to it versus USL where there's none unless you somehow win the Open Cup. I think that's also another factor. So I think if you're Wild Engineers, Smirnotis, and I think they've shown it, the fact they're still around heading into, what are we now already, CPL year 7, is that unless there's, a better job to go to, stay and build. And they've done a great job. And the one of the reasons why the CPL level has grown so much has been because of Wild Engineer and Smirnotis. And I think that's also something that's forgotten, that while you want them to leave almost for their sake to go move up and to show what this league's capable of, it's not a bad thing for the league to keep them around. And I think that's why they've stayed.
And the Whitecaps, of course, also finally got their coaching hire over the line this week. They announced Jesper Sørenson, a Danish coach who comes over from the Danish league, a bit of an unknown to Canadian fans in a lot of ways. I think that's what we were kind of expecting with the Whitecaps hire. There was the names that we knew that were floating around. I'd heard that Jim Curtin was close to the Whitecaps job. Apparently that was a false report that I had heard of. But an interesting hire in Jesper Sørenson. He comes in. Is he the type of coach that can get the Whitecaps over that hump and work with the roster that they have, as Axel Schuster kind of alluded to when he announced that Vanni Sartini wasn't coming back to the club, Brendan?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think Alex said this very clearly, that this is a team that's, built to win now and feels like they're very close. So I think Axel went with a very tactical choice here, thinking that this is someone who's tactically is going to adjust quickly to MLS life and best suits the players that they currently have in order to give them an edge. And I mean, being an unknown and being an outsider, and a kind of a different thinker, that can have a big impact very quickly in MLS, right? It's the other stuff, that if Axel's handling all of that, the weird intricacies of MLS, that's what usually makes things difficult for European coaches who come over here with out of knowledge or experience of Major League Soccer. But I think that they wanted to make a almost purely tactical choice and an adjustment, or boost is what they were looking for. And Axel thinks that this is the guy. So I'm excited to see how it works, and the fact that they were able to get this over the line before heading off for preseason. I think on Tuesday, it's good that they've got there, because I would have hated this to have dragged on a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, the Whitecaps made it clear, and they made it clear with Vanni Sartini. They made it clear when Vanni Sartini departed, they were looking for a trainer more so than a coach, right? Like, they're not looking for a manager who's got to come in, reset a culture, reset an ethos, have a hand in transfers. No, they have a playing group, and Axel Schuster is going to be the man to keep upgrading it and, do all that. Ultimately, they want a coach to come in that, okay, when Schuster comes and, look, I'm looking at this left winger, yay or nay, offer some feedback. Other than that, there's no, and I think when you look at what Sørensen's has done, there's some green flags that are intriguing. I think his work with Brøndby is fascinating, because in Denmark they've got some, his Brøndby team challenged the kind of top end of what's done in Denmark in terms of finances and the big two there. He should have won the title, it sounds like, if not for a slip up on the last day. Heartbreaking for him, and that just kind of snowballed into him leaving Brøndby. But he's shown that he can punch above his weight, which is good for the Whitecaps, because their spending is up a lot over where it was 5-10 years ago, but they're still a middle of the pack spender, and they probably will be unless they surprise with their U22 signings. And I thought, interestingly, I listened to the press conference this morning. His style should actually fit pretty well with the team. His emphasis was on ball control. He's like, I want to be a guy who holds possession, holds the ball. I think defending is important. But then he made a funny reference. He's like, Lionel Messi, he's in this league, right? Well, he can absolutely destroy you when he has the ball. But when he doesn't have the ball, he can't hurt you. So why not? Should we prioritize to hold the ball? And I think for this Whitecaps team, they've done a good job of Veselinovic, Laborda, Blackman, Takaoka, Armstrong. You go up the list. Those are guys that are comfortable with the ball, that are comfortable playing. Vanni Sartini was a bit more of a transitional coach, and the Whitecaps could also play that way. But I think this idea of control actually fits them quite well. And I think that's probably another reason why Sørensen quickly became a priority when Schuster looked at the roster that he built and what Sørensen could maybe get out of it.
Do you think this hurts a guy like Brian White, who was definitely good in that sort of direct and attacking style that the Whitecaps had in that year, where Brian White and Ryan Gauld continued to work on their partnership and be one of the best duos in MLS? That was very much down to what Sartini had. But Brendan, do you think that this potentially hurts Brian White's effectiveness with the Whitecaps?
I think there's always, one of the regulars that seems to be adversely affected with a coaching change. I think he's someone now with the experience that he's had in this league that I give him the benefit of the doubt. He'll find a way to adapt. Honestly, guys, I think the bigger loss that you're going to notice is Fafa Picault, because I think he brought way more to the Whitecaps last season than they expected when they brought him in, and than they would have hoped they would have needed out of a player in a piece like that. So to be honest, I think that how they adjust to his absence might be the bigger question mark than how Brian White adjusts, because I believe that he will. They'll figure it out, and that Sørensen will see his value and recognize that that's a player that can play a big role. So you don't want to tinker too much to ostracize or neutralize someone like that. You want them to be effective and be a key part of your team.
Well, I think it depends too what you get, because I think with Pico leaving and this emphasis on system control, it's going to ultimately depend on the buildup. I think that's where I'd answer the question with White. For White, he's a simple striker in the sense that you give him chance, more often than not, he'll go through his 6 games without a goal, but then he'll go with 6 games and score you 8, and you'll kind of be like, where did those 8 goals come from? And he'll somehow finish every season with 15 goals that he just pulled out of somewhere. if Ryan Gauld gets more touches in this system, if Stuart Armstrong is going to be in the ball more in the final third and they're going to be delivering chances, Brian White's going to score. I think what's going to be interesting is, can Ali Ahmed step up as a Fafa Pico replacement? And I don't mean like for like. I think Ali Ahmed could be a real winner in this system if Sorenson's really going to come in and prioritize control, having Ahmed as someone who can link together the lines. Vanni Sartini often struggled with the idea of playing him as a midfielder or as a winger. If Sorenson can make him a midfielder, help him play in the transition game, he can make up for losing Pico if he can help get Gauld and Armstrong more the ball in the final third, which will then get Brian White more chances. I think that's an area where the Whitecaps sometimes struggled, is if you can get Gauld the ball more often in the final third, you will do well. And sometimes there were stretches where they didn't do that enough.
2 new coaches, 2 new outlooks for Toronto FC and the Vancouver Whitecaps. Are both clubs going to be better next season than they were last year, Brendan?
Toronto FC will be better. I don't know for certain that the Whitecaps will be better. And because I don't think that Sartini was the only problem. And I disagree with Axel Schuster that they had all the right pieces and that all they needed was a trainer. I don't think that they did. And my Pico example is one of them. And I know I got chirped from some NFPers last year when I said, look, they need their best guys to be at their best all the time. And like, yes, that's in general, you want that from your players. But if that's the only way you put points on the board, which had been the case for the Whitecaps at this point, I think it was, I was saying this, before the slump really started there, August heading into September, where it looked like there were some real red flags and you saw them, fall down the standings there. I think that Vancouver's going to have a hard time kind of matching last season. I think that they might consistently look like a team that's between 6 and 8 and rarely show that they're a team that looks capable of contending at the top, even though on paper we all believe that's where they should be.
Yeah, I think TFC is the easy one to say. I think they will be marginally better at the very least. I think that one feels easy. The Whitecaps is tough because, you make some good points there, Brendan, in terms of what they bring in. I think the reality is we can't fully judge this Whitecaps teams till we see the signings they're going to make, because they've kind of hinted that they're going to make a few. They sold Diber Caicedo, opened up an international spot. You see the news today that MLS is bringing in a second buyout. You're already wondering, might the Whitecaps consider a buyout of a Damir Krylak? All of a sudden having a second buyout in their pocket opens up roster flexibility. They've got U22 spots. They could make a couple big signings and that could change. But also, as we've shown, they've sometimes taken their time with signings and that might slow down the process. We also don't know how Sorenson's going to adapt to MLS. At the same time, I think with how the Whitecaps ended last year, that just wasn't a fair reflection of the group that they'd put together. And I think ultimately it was a bunch of factors snowballing at the wrong time. I think under the radar, 4 of their best players got injured right around or after that Canadian Championship final, and a few of them tried to play through it, and that probably wasn't the wisest decision in hindsight, but because there was a final on the line, silverware, maybe some decisions you don't normally make come into play. So I still think that the Whitecaps at the very least should marginally improve, but this team, I've said it last year, I'll stick with it as long as they have this group. This should comfortably be a top 4 team in the West. Last year they finished 8th. I think they should be better to finish 7th or 6th at the very least, but Sorenson's effect and the signings they make will determine whether it's another 7-6 weird season or if they can finally make that jump into top 4 they keep teasing that they'll make over the last few years.
If they sign Nicholas Bentner, boys, they're done. They're done.
I think when you look at both clubs, they're going to end up in a very similar spot. TFC will be slightly better, and the Whitecaps might, in terms of their quality and their moments, be slightly worse, but end up in a similar spot. So I could see both of these clubs playing in that 8-9 playoff game when it comes to the playoffs next year. And I think that's a very reasonable expectation for both of those teams. Whether you win that, it's a coin flip, really, whether you're 8th or 9th. And then, of course, you're up against the top seed, which we kind of know the usual suspects when it comes to the top seed as well. But a busy week in the Northern Super League as well, as signings really start to heat up. The Vancouver Rise signed former Seattle Reign midfielder Nikki Stanton. AFC Toronto signed Orlando Pride goalkeeper Sophia Manor and Korean international Hyung-hee Jae. And Montreal signed U Sports Standout and Sporting CP's Megan Sauvé, while Ottawa looks set to sign a Canadian gold medalist per the teaser that they've been putting out over the last little while. So a big week in the NSL. I think AFC Toronto with probably the 2 most exciting signings so far as players that can step in and make a real impact. But I do like that Megan Sauvé to the Montreal Roses because she was very impressive in U Sports and she's been good since she's turned pro as well.
Yeah, overall, some big signings. I'm liking the internationals just because we spoke last episode of what kind of internationals. AFC Toronto bringing in Hung Hee-ji, like that's what you want. 30 international caps for Korea. That sort of experience. That's exciting. I saw that signing and I was like, okay, wow. There's been, there've been a few signings like that now in recent weeks. So yeah, it's good to see this wave of international start. Exciting to see as well a gold medalist in the league, because look, the reality is that'll be a name that's known to people, that will help sell tickets, that will help bring interest to the league. So far, I like the moves.
Yeah, me too. It's been exciting. They're building. It's getting closer, and we're less than 100 days now. So yeah, April can't come fast enough.
Still a long way to go. Some clubs only have 7 to 10 players signed, and you do need a full roster, however big these rosters will end up being. So still a long way to go. We still have stadium news, of course, looming for a lot of the clubs as well. But we'll jump into our Canadians Abroad section. For a full roundup of the latest in Canadians Abroad, check out the Canucks Abroad on Twitter and Blue Sky. Another week, another goal for Dio Mercy Michel, this time in cup action for Vitória de Guimarães, although it came in the Taça de Portugal lost to O Elvas. And Brendan, I know I butchered a few of the names there.
You know what? I'll give you credit. Okay, I'll start my attack with a compliment. You are amazing with the Korean name, and you didn't even take a breath. It just flowed. The whole sentence was great. I thought, oh, here we go. Nope, great. You just got to eat some more Portuguese food, man. And remember, every time you see the accent that looks like a little 5 under the C, it makes a S sound, not a K sound. It's sound. The Taça de Portugal, Vitória Guimarães.
Do you have any natas you can give Ben to maybe start to feel that Portuguese?
Not you know what, I would, and then you know what he'd say, like, oh, I'm sorry guys, I can't eat this. This doesn't work with my macros today, and I've got this 30-kilometer run to go, and I'm going to try and do it in about half an hour before I go on some date that I'm taking to a U Sports badminton game. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll just eat this extra nata myself.
I'll have one.
So much for the kosher salt I bought you to put on top of it. I thought it was being nice. Nope, still not good enough. Never good enough for Ben.
Painfully on brand.
Never put kosher salt on a push this nata though. We'll try that next time.
The question at hand, though, Dio Mercy Michel, how far do we think he is potentially from getting into the Canadian men's national team at this point, Alex?
He's inching closer. I mean, we mentioned it last week, just the fact he's getting regular minutes, the fact he's familiar with having been a training player, the fact he's in the Portuguese league. Canada loves the Portuguese league. You got his stack, you got all the host of women's players who have gone through the league, the Lacases, or you got the Aladus still there. Jesse Marsh will be keeping an eye on Dio Mercy Michel. So I'm just excited to see that he's had this breakthrough, because he'd been training for a while with Vitoria's B team, and there'd been talks of keep an eye on him. And I think it's telling that he's finally got this opportunity. He's grabbed it with 2 hands. He's earning starts. He's scoring goals. So I just want to see him continue to progress and grow and add competition. That, all of a sudden, we'll keep throwing it out. The Gold Cup team feels like it's going to be very exciting if names like this continue to pop up every few weeks.
And quite a few names having success for the Canadian men's national team. I know Brendan has to hop out, but we'll continue on with our Canucks Abroad here momentarily. And Daniel Jebbison also has more goals for Bournemouth than Watford, although he did score a garbage time goal in a 5-1 FA Cup win against championship side West Brom. Still an early confidence booster for Jebbison, who has been all over his social media since he's returned as well.
Yeah, I mean, exciting for him. I'm sure the Watford fans will be fuming that, he spent the whole time on loan, didn't score, and then he scores against championship side when he goes with Bournemouth. Obviously, better players, better team, it helps. But no, it bodes well, because I mentioned it last week, huge opportunity with all the injuries at Bournemouth. Jebbison's going to start as, a rotation piece, but hey, I'm sure Bournemouth would love if he steps up and finds a way to become a 30-minute man, even a 60-minute man. So hopefully that was just the confidence booster he needs, because we know there's a lot of talent there. There's been some very unfortunate medical problems, injuries as well, that have plagued him over the last few years. He just needs some consistency and some fitness. So we'll be keeping an eye on him, because I know he's definitely one of the favored Canadian dual nationals whenever you throw out. Who's a dual national you're excited about? A lot of people are always excited about Daniel Jebbison. There's a reason why. He's got a lot of potential, just a lot of work as well to live up to it.
And more noise has emerged about Tajon Buchanan's future. Loan options are on the table from some Premier League clubs per Matchinetti and Roma per Italian reports. Will he leave or stay and fight for minutes at Inter Milan? I would like him to leave. And if it's to another club in Italy, if it's to La Liga, if it's to the Premier League, I think that's a worthwhile loan. If it's taking a step down, okay, maybe not. But if he can start to get some more regular minutes, still at one of the top 3 to 5 leagues in Europe, that's definitely still that's an option that I would take rather than fighting for minutes and getting the odd assignment at Inter Milan.
Yeah, I'd like to see him stay and fight, just because I think he hasn't gotten himself the fair shake he deserves, in the sense that it's been out of his control with the injuries and his timing of arrival and everything like that. But I think it's also encouraging that EPL teams and Roma are looking at him, that's the level. And I think that bodes well. For me, the timeline for Buchanan remains see out this season. Maybe this summer we'll see what happens if he goes to the Club World Cup. Who knows? Maybe if there's no room for him at the Club World Cup, he goes and plays a Gold Cup, which might not actually be the worst thing for him and his confidence if he goes and dominates that tournament. And then you see what the fall brings. And if he can win a spot with Inter, if Denzel Dumfries finally gets sold. Funny side note, I think when we mentioned Dumfries never being sold a few weeks ago, he literally scored like an hour after the recording. So Dumfries continues to be internal for Inter. And then if you arrive August, end of that summer transfer window, and there's no spot for him, okay, then you go to a Roma, then you go to an EPL. And if you do win a spot, great, you're an Inter player. But hey, this is the reality of the big club. But nice to see that Buchanan, even though he's been on a bench for a lot of his Milan stint, that it hasn't been forgotten how talented he still is.
And Kwasi Poku's first season with RWD Molenbeek is over after a hip injury and hernia surgery. And Jade Riviere has signed an extension at Manchester United through the 2028 season as well. But reports out of Portugal that Geneva Hernandez-Gray from the Whitecaps Academy, and of course played with the Whitecaps in the CONCACAF Women's Champions Cup this year, is going to Sporting CP after many had her being one of the premier first signings potentially in the NSL and with the Vancouver Rise. This the right move for Geneva Hernandez-Gray when it comes to her career? Or is this more disappointing that she isn't ending up in the NSL?
I think it's exciting for Hernandez-Gray. I think it's disappointing if you look at it from an NSL lens, of course. She's a young, exciting talent. She's one of the best prospects in this country. And of course, you want her playing close to home. And, if you're a Rise fan, you want her on the team. But I think this is something where this is a great opportunity. You can't forget she actually has, I'm pretty sure, a Portuguese passport. She has at least some sort of Portuguese heritage. So that must have facilitated the move, which is a big plus. And Sporting is a great development environment. I think if she follows anything close to, say, like an Olivia Smith arc, who is a similar age when she signs for Sporting, a year later she's at Liverpool. If that's in Hernandez-Gray's future, I think you'd take that trade-off. So I think this is great for her development as a player. And I think, another point for the Whitecaps, which is worth noting, that if she goes and there'll be some sort of, I think she'll go as a free agent, but there's training, solidarity, and compensation that could actually be involved. So they could net some money from Hernandez-Gray getting this move, which could then help them pay someone's salary or buy a transfer. So this isn't actually the end of the world from the Whitecaps perspective too.
Yeah, I think you can look at that, and you can also see a more established route from Sporting to bigger European clubs and bigger stages within the women's game, whereas we don't really know what that route is in the NSL yet. We're getting a sense of what the level could be, and it's looking like it's going to be a pretty competitive level and maybe not equivalent right off the bat to the NWSL, but not so far from it. But we don't know what that growth pathway is. And so if you start in the NSL, who's coming calling? Whereas you know exactly who's coming calling. If you star in Portugal, you know it's going to be Italy, you know it's going to be England, and those clubs that are a little bit bigger across Europe as well. So I think for her, it's probably a good move. It's a safer move for sure in terms of her continued development. Disappointing for the Vancouver Rise because she could have really been the face of that club over the first couple of years in this league. But certainly exciting for Geneva Hernandez-Gray and fans of Canadian soccer and Canadian soccer development as well, especially for people like us and Michael McCall that have seen her playing since she was 14 or 15 with the Whitecaps Academy in League One.
Yeah, exactly. Promising talent. It's still important to get these opportunities in Europe. So it's while you want, promising Canadian talent to come through, if these opportunities come calling, right? And I think the same goes if there's any promising Canadian prospects who get NWSL offers. I know there was a former U20 player who got signed to the Orlando Pride this week. Like, great. These development opportunities are good. We have to remember NSL is in year one. And ideally in 5 years, a lot of the top Canadians are all coming through NSL teams at 15, 16. We're not there yet. The league hasn't even kicked a ball. So you can only help but celebrate moments like this because this will help Hernandez-Gray's career. And that's ultimately what we want to see.
That's all we've got for this episode of Northern Football, episode 210. Make sure to subscribe and like and rate the podcast wherever you're getting it, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you take in Northern Football here on the 90th Minute. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Brendan and Alex, I've been Ben, and we'll be back next time.